Well, let me start with this. What made you pick The Silence of the Lambs, Constantine, Crazy Stupid Love, and Election?
Basically just availability of those movies. Like I had Silence of the Lambs was one of the blind buys that I did on my most recent Criterion shopping spree. And
good for you.
Constantine was on Netflix. Election was another Criterion Collection blind buy. And then what was Crazy Stupid Love? That was Netflix. So yeah, it was like 2 Netflix ones. They just happened to have been added in the past few weeks, and they were on my list. And then the other 2 were Blu-rays that I'd owned but never watched. And of course, everyone's got all the time in the world. So.
Yeah, so the one thing about Criterion is like, even if you're against physical media and you think it's silly, the Criterion stuff, they give you a lot of like extra written material that you can read through, and it's quite fascinating, especially the stuff on The Silence of the Lambs. I don't know if you've been able to leaf through it, but they talk about the production and some of the ideas they had, and I thought all of that was really interesting. I don't know how deeply you looked into that.
I didn't get too far, but I did watch there was one documentary on the like feature disc in the collection.
Okay, right. I remember that.
It's like, I think it's only 17 or 18 minutes, but
yeah, it's not long. It's like a TV featurette.
Yeah, and it's basically an interview with a film critic, and she's going through various things about like the evolution of the Hannibal Lecter character and stuff. So it's kind of like it's a teaser for the much more in-depth bonus features on the second disc in the set, which I haven't got to yet.
The staging for that featurette is very 90s, eh?
Yeah.
Like, it just feels old. It's just a lady in a chair, I think. And she's just kind of talking to you off a teleprompter. And there's no, like, fancy graphics, no, like, weird editing or cuts or anything. It's just this lady who's talking to you.
Yeah, and then they intercut it with a few clips from some of the other Hannibal Lecter-related stuff over the years, you know, right. the various movies, and then the TV show that was, I think it was like on NBC or something, with Mads Mikkelsen. But yeah, so that was my first exposure to the whole world of Lecter and the books and the movies and the media, and it's made me interested in some of the other stuff, even though I know that a lot of it, certainly the movies, are not that good.
Have you read the books?
No, I haven't read the books.
Oh, read the books. Especially Red Dragon is way better. Like, the book is way better than the movie.
Right.
The movie, I think, was kind of underrated, because if you watch it now, it's actually really creepy. But the books, I think, are still superior to the film. But the film Silence of the Lambs is as close as I think you could get in terms of the quality of the book in matching it.
Right. But we'll get into all of that.
Yeah, let's intro, and then let's talk about Silence of the Lambs. How does that sound?
All right, let's give it a roll.
Welcome to the 71st episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between 2 guys who love TV and film. My name is Jason Chen, and I'm joined today by my partner in crime, Robert Snow. Today, we talk through some of the old movies I've been bugging Rob to watch, including The Silence of the Lambs, Constantine, Election, and Crazy Stupid Love. And we'll talk about The Hunt, a movie that Rob recently watched at home. But the big topic will be the twisting, winding tale that is Tiger King, Netflix's new hit documentary. And we'll also touch on Dirty Money, the other Netflix documentary series that also highlights some of the most despicable people in the world. So, Silence of the Lambs, though, before we get to the good stuff.
Well, can I just say that was a very good intro?
Oh, thank you.
That was one of our best intros.
Thank you. I wrote this. I wrote it out this time.
Did you really? Were you reading off of a written script?
I was. I need to write this stuff down.
Oh my God.
Because I can't do off the cuff anymore. It sounds too wishy-washy, but...
Oh, okay. Well, impressive that you wrote that down in the space of like the 4 minutes that we were talking before we started?
Like half an hour before we started. I was like, I need to write this down. Yeah. I'm prepared this time. Come on.
Wow. All right.
I actually am prepared with a lot of Silence of the Lambs factoids too, but I just want to get your first thoughts about the movie, because it's brilliant. It's one of my top 4 in Letterboxd.
Yeah, well, I feel like I should get like a little friendship medal or something, because I finally watched all 4 of the movies that you've listed as your favorites on Letterboxd.
Okay, well, so next time you come to Vancouver, or next time I see you, we'll go out and I'll buy you a meal or something.
Okay, that works.
For your time.
Well, so the story of like my watching or non-watching of Silence of the Lambs is, Jason's been bugging me to watch this forever. And honestly, I do feel a little bit ashamed that, one of the greatest movies, if not of the 90s of all time, in many critics' estimation, I'd never seen. And I don't really know how that is. I think I certainly, I was maybe 2 or 3 years old when it came out. And then, of course...
Yeah, I saw this much later, too.
And I don't know if it was just maybe it was I wasn't too into horror movies for a long time.
Right.
And it's only been in the past couple of years that I've been trying to watch some of the brand new horror movies that, the cream of the crop, essentially. Well, the one or two that come out every year that people really get behind. So maybe that was the reason. But of course, you tell anybody that you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs and you're a movie buff, and of course people are like, what? It's up there with Citizen Kane and other stuff when it comes to movies that you have to watch. And now having watched it, I'm like, yeah, I can see what everyone was raving about it. Even though it's a serial killer type movie with, all of the signposts of a typical kind of murder mystery kind of thing, almost the kind of thing that you would find everywhere on Netflix these days, both scripted TV shows and documentaries. It still has this kind of the execution of it is so on point that you just kind of have to sit back and go, oh yeah, okay, this is why this thing is held up as such a masterclass.
You're not real FBI, are you?
I'm still in training at the academy.
Jack Crawford sent a trainee to me.
Yes, I'm a student. I'm here to learn from you. Maybe you can decide for yourself whether or not I'm qualified enough to do that.
That is rather slippery of you, Agent Starling.
So my mom had watched this, and she's not a big horror movie person, but as I got older, she's like, you need to watch this because this is incredible. For a while it was on TV, but an edited version. And finally, I think I was around way too young still, maybe around 10 or 11.
Oh, wow.
Where I sat down and watched this film, and I was blown away. And with each viewing, I watched this movie, it's probably one of my most watched movies ever. And with every viewing, you always come away with something new. And you're always, even though you know where the story is going, you're always kind of amazed by how they managed to pull this off. And how each time you're still terrified of Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, and even though, broadly speaking, he's not the main villain, in air quotes, that the FBI character, Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, is trying to find, the entire movie kind of is in his orbit, basically.
Yes, because everything revolves around him, because he is this fountain of information for Clarice Starling. And he's kind of playing cat and mouse with her. And that's a big part of the psychological element of that film. Mm-hmm. I thought Jodie Foster was brilliant as Clarice Starling. There are a lot of other actresses that were up for this role. So famously, Meg Ryan turned this one down. Michelle Pfeiffer turned this one down. Laura Dern was in the mix for a while, but Jodie Foster had to really fight for this role. And you could see it in Clarice Starling's character, where she's this female in this male-dominated occupation. And because she's so small in stature and everyone else around her looks like a giant, there's this really striking juxtaposition between her ability and who she is versus the rest of the other FBI agents.
Big time, yeah. Well, I was struck by how this is a movie that is kind of advancing a feminist kind of
totally
kind of point of view, but without hammering you over the head with it. And it's a kind of, it's done in a way that feels instantly recognizable today, because there's all kinds of movies and TV shows that are putting forward Clarice Starling as played by Jodie Foster type characters in their scripts, and it's still being done this way because arguably the same societal issues that the movie was confronting when it came out are still present today. And there's incremental progress being made, but maybe not fast enough. So it does feel weirdly ahead of its time.
Definitely. I think so. How do you think this movie would have turned out if it had been Michelle Pfeiffer or Meg Ryan or Laura Dern in the role?
I could see Laura Dern or Michelle Pfeiffer in the role, not so much Meg Ryan. I mean, no offense against Meg Ryan. I see her more in a romantic comedy kind of vibe because
Oh yeah, she hates that reputation though as like America's sweetheart.
I know she does, but you know, it is what it is. So obviously, like Pfeiffer and Dern have they've played characters with more edge in their careers.
So,
but I still think you're right though that like Foster brings for lack of a better word, like an innocence to it.
And a strength, like a really quiet strength that gets tested all the time. Yeah, so right before this, Jodie Foster had done The Accused, which is a movie I have a lot of trouble sitting through, but it's about a woman who gets gang raped. And Jodie Foster plays that woman, and she's kind of stuck in this situation where it's her word versus against other men. And so she has this, I think, built-in experience from playing the woman in The Accused, and it translates very well into Silence of the Lambs. But Pfeiffer famously was rejected because they thought she was too pretty for the role. She obviously turned it down as well, but Pfeiffer has also turned down Basic Instinct, which is another like R-rated, very tense thriller, a little bit more sexual, of course. But Meg Ryan felt it was too violent for her, which I get. And at the time, Laura Dern wasn't like a big name, so that's why they passed on her. And it took, I think, a while for Jodie Foster to convince Jonathan Demme to play the role of Clarice. I don't know if you know this, but Jonathan Demme originally wanted Sean Connery as Dr. Lecter, which I think would have been the worst choice in the world. Like, no offense to Sean Connery.
He's not right for the role, though. I mean, it's just...
No, and imagine him with a Scottish accent. It doesn't work.
The dude...
Like, it's not going to go away. And if he plays Lecter, he's going to have a Scottish accent.
Yeah.
The other choice, reportedly, was Robert De Niro. And I thought that was an interesting one.
I could see that more than Connery.
Yeah, but, like, both of them, I think, really pale in comparison, because Lecter has this like creepy vibe, eh? Like it's something in his eyes and his teeth, and the close-ups that Jonathan Demme gets makes him super creepy.
Yeah, and there's a lot going into the vocal performance that Hopkins is doing, yes, where it's kind of like it's a much higher kind of register than the way he normally speaks,
right? And
there's a kind of like lilt to it that immediately makes you're like, oh wow, okay, that's different. And it kind of perks your ears up.
Right. The other thing, too, was that this movie kind of has a famous production history in that Gene Hackman was originally attached to it. He was going to play, I think, either Lecter or Crawford, the FBI director.
Oh, yeah.
And the story goes that Gene Hackman's daughter read the book. And she's like, Dad, you can't do this. This is too violent. And a lot of people rejected this film on the grounds that it was too gruesome and violent. Because I don't know if you noticed, but like in the first few scenes where Jodie Foster first visits the inmate, she gets basically assaulted. And it's quite striking and
well, it's very visceral. I mean,
yeah, like visceral, exactly.
Like she gets like semen thrown on her by this inmate who's it's something that, like, you know, you could 100% see as plausible for somebody who's like visiting an asylum, especially one with like that kind of creepy Victorian basement kind of cells for the inmates. But it's still like a shocking image. You don't see that kind of thing very often in a mainstream Hollywood movie.
Did you know that this was released on Valentine's Day?
Ooh, I did not.
So apparently that was Jonathan Demme, the director's idea. That's because Orion Pictures at the time was actually like in huge financial trouble. I think shortly after this film, they basically went bankrupt. But they had another film that was like for sure gunning for the Oscars, and that was Dancing with Wolves. And so that became like the awards sort of season release. And then this was released earlier in the year. And then they had like a huge campaign for it. Ended up winning the big 5 Oscars. One of the few films to actually do it.
Yeah.
Famously, though, the author of the book, Thomas Harris, has never reportedly seen the film.
That's like a major power move when you're like, you write a book and it's adapted into a critically acclaimed, beloved adaptation, and you're still like, I can pass.
But here's the thing. He didn't pass because he didn't like it. He passed because he felt that if Anthony Hopkins was so good as Lecter, Lecter would end up being Hopkins's character and not Harris's.
Oh.
So in the subsequent books, Thomas Harris felt that he would have had trouble coming up with stories for Lecter because Anthony Hopkins had already embodied this character. And this isn't unlike John le Carre with Alec Guinness in the role of Smiley in the old BBC series. Yeah. The reason why le Carre didn't want to watch it because he thought Guinness was so good that he couldn't even write Smiley ever again.
Huh. I wonder if le Carre stuck to that after the Gary Oldman played him in that adaptation from a few years back.
Yeah, I think Smiley seems like a more easily playable, more accessible character to play. There's something about Lecter's intelligence and threatening sort of presence, even though Hopkins is not a big guy, that's really hard to replicate for any actor. Like Sean Connery's an imposing dude, but he's not creepy.
No. And any viewer would... People like to say that like it's unfair to typecast actors because, if you've got a comedy actor who really wants to do a drama and then they do the drama, people don't take them seriously because they're too used to them being a comedian and the other way around, that it's kind of unfair to treat actors that way. They should be allowed to do whatever projects they want. But then sometimes it is really hard because you get, as a viewer, you get used to a particular person doing a particular role. And then when they tried something else, although with Connery, like you're right, he would have had a hard time shedding the accent, if at all. So
I don't think he would have tried to shed it.
Yeah. So that would have been a problem.
Any final thoughts about Silence of the Lambs before we move on?
No, other than like people should, if you're like me and somehow it kind of flew past you, either run out and get the Criterion edition, or I think it's pretty easy to get on streaming now too. It's not one of these classics that's been kind of put in the bin and hard to find. I think you can get it on Amazon and maybe not Netflix in Canada, but certainly other streamers as well.
So speaking of actors who kind of play similar roles all over again, how about Keanu Reeves in Constantine? Like, this is very like precursor to John Wick, precursor to like a lot of action movies that he's done that deals with like supernatural or like hellfire and demons.
Yeah. So, and it's funny how like at first I was like, I was having a hard time seeing the through line in the movies that I was catching up on, but I do sort of see the segue there. So that's kind of cool. No, but I think I remember when the trailer for Constantine came out and that was 2005. That was around about when like I was becoming really aware of Rotten Tomatoes being a thing. It had existed before that, but then like the reviews dropped for Constantine good. And it was like pretty, I can't remember the official score, but it definitely wasn't fresh. No. It was, it was very maybe around like middling. 30-40%. And the kind of consensus was that it was a fine kind of like, it had some kind of some fun creature feature type stuff and some cool production design, and Keanu was pretty solid, but the overall experience of the movie was kind of meh. Oh, okay. And I kind of agree with that assessment, but you're right. Like there are certain experiences in it when taken individually that are fun. Like a movie that came out the exact same year, Hellboy, Guillermo del Toro.
Right. There are similarities.
Has some, with this kind of like connection between the supernatural and religion, like a secret war that's being waged between defenders of good, defenders of evil, heaven and hell. Hellboy brought in that aspect, he was using like bullets filled with holy water and stuff like that, but also more mystical, less like Christian related stuff as well.
Yes.
This has got a very Catholic kind of leaning to it, where it's very kind of coded with kind of Gothic imagery and exorcisms and all the stuff that the Catholic Church is all about.
What does he want from me?
Only the usual: self-sacrifice, belief.
I believe for Christ's sake.
No. And there's a difference. You've seen.
I never asked to see. I was born with this curse.
A gift, John.
So this is one of my first viewings of Tilda Swinton.
Oh, okay.
And from that point on, I was just like terrified of her because she plays this like this hellish creature. I think she plays like an angel gone bad. Right?
Yes, yeah. She plays Gabriel, who in this is not like a full blooded angel, but is kind of a mixed breed.
Right. and I was legitimately terrified. And for a while, this was like Keanu Reeves's like spot where there was some sort of action element. There was a tortured main character, which I think like kind of parallels his sort of personal life, and this sort of like eternal battle between good versus evil. I think he's always had that element in a lot of his films. If you think about like The Matrix or even John Wick.
Yeah.
I actually really liked parts of this film. As a whole, I agree it's very middling. Like it's not going to excite you. But I do enjoy certain moments of it because, as you said, there is a Del Toro vibe to this. There's things awash in like red, orange heat glows. There are certain shots that are like very neo-noir. There's a sort of like history or mystery element to it.
Yep.
Where he has like guys who design weapons for him, guys who are very knowledgeable about the Bible and other biblical literature that help him along. And Rachel Weisz is in this too. And there's a shot where she's in a pool. It's in the final moments, and he's trying to save her in time. And that was one of like the most lasting shots that really stuck with me because of the colors and literally the amount of blood there was.
Yeah, like it is. It doesn't spare the gore, which I appreciate. The production design of some of his weapons is just flat out cool. Like like similar to what Del Toro does, where at one point he's wielding this shotgun that's shaped like a crucifix, and it fires these these explosive charges that turn vampires / zombie enemies into dust. So it's there's a bit of like a kind of like a yeah kind of thing to it.
So it has all these like really good parts, but for you, where does it fall apart? Like, why doesn't it come together into something that's bigger or better received?
I think, if you compare it against Hellboy, which we've been doing, Hellboy is he's a more compelling character, I think.
They're both comic book characters too, eh?
They're both comic book characters, and they're both like demon hunters, but Hellboy has got a very distinct kind of like, he's a blue collar guy just trying to save the earth kind of thing. And
he's a devil.
He's a devil, he's partly from the dimension that is causing all the trouble, and he's at war with his identity and stuff like that. Whereas Constantine is, his ability to see these otherworldly creatures is a burden for him that other people would interpret as a gift. So there's some parallels, but he's just a little bit more like, he's more salty and misanthropic than Hellboy, and he's not really cracking wise in the same way. He just feels kind of angsty. And so you can't really get on his level in the same way. And then the movie as itself, like the set pieces, it's fine leading up until, I would say, when it gets to the conclusion and like Satan shows up. Satan is played by Peter Stormare in this like great kind of bit of tongue-in-cheek costuming where Satan is actually dressed in this beautiful white suit and is like barefoot, which was a cool design. But then the ending kind of drags a little bit, where it's implied that Constantine will get a ticket into heaven, but then Satan kind of pulls a trick on him at the last minute and says, well, I'll cure your lung cancer if I can still get a chance of like corrupting you and getting you down to hell with me. And it just kind of, it drags that out along, and it just gets sillier and sillier. And I was like, I think I would have preferred it if it ended sooner, or if it skipped over all of that kind of metaphysical stuff and went right to Constantine is going to hit the road again and, go back out and fight more monsters, which I guess was their play for a sequel, but I figured it should have come just a little bit sooner.
Right.
And not get so mired down. But other than that, yeah, like you were saying, it's, individual scenes are really solid. Some of the creature effects and the special effects work really well, but for me, it doesn't feel quite as together as something like Hellboy.
Yeah, I think there are too many ideas they wanted to extrapolate, but didn't have an idea of how to tie it together, or just ran out of time. If you're into this sort of like demon hellscape sort of thriller type movie, there's another one I kind of suggest. I only suggest you watch it if you can find it. It's a 1999 film called The Ninth Gate.
I've heard the title.
Yeah, it's by Roman Polanski, and it stars Johnny Depp. And
don't know how I feel about that.
Well, I think you can watch a movie without, being, I guess if you can ignore that this is a Polanski film, I think maybe kind of bearable to watch, I guess. It's not a great film by any means, but it's an interesting sort of like film in a similar vein. There's not a comic book or a superhero film at all, but there are certain notes that are very similar.
I see. Okay. So then flipping over to completely different genres then after that, like, you know, total cognitive dissonance here. We'll quickly run through Crazy Stupid Love, I guess. Again, like, this is a movie that I actually remember watching the trailer when it hit the internet.
Right.
I think this Crazy Stupid Love came out in 2011, and I had not watched all the way through The Office, but obviously I knew who Steve Carell was at the time. I knew who Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone were, but for some reason, like, the movie came and it went, and I think at the time it received, you know, relatively positive reviews, nothing glowing or anything like that. And then I just kind of forgot about it for a long time. And then it popped, like is the case with so many things, popped up on Netflix a few weeks back, added to my queue, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll finally see whether the the trailer that I watched eons ago actually lived up to it. Because I remember that trailer being, you know, they seem to capture some decent kind of chemistry in it.
Yeah, so
especially between like Gosling and Stone.
This was a movie that's forgettable because among the romantic comedies, this is clearly one of the most forgettable ones. And if you think about Ryan Gosling romantic movies, everyone goes to The Notebook, right?
Yeah.
And with Emma Stone, it's Easy A. So this was kind of those summer mainstream sort of like romantic comedies where this really suave kind of like really cool guy who doesn't care about anything meets this girl who just flips his world upside down. Like, it's a very like a very generic plot in that sense. And I think what helps it along is that all three leads are very good. This was at the time where Gosling was at his peak. And then there's a scene where like he takes off his shirt and he shows off his abs. And that was like the one lasting image everyone took away from the trailer and the film.
Take off your shirt.
Why?
Please, will you take off your shirt? Because I can't stop thinking. And I need you just...
Okay.
All right, okay.
Okay.
Fuck! Seriously? It's like you're photoshopped.
Yeah, I think that's what I remembered because, you know, there's a bit of like... There's an aspect in that exchange where like he takes off his shirt, Emma Stone reacts in kind of like a come on kind of way, like she just can't believe that she's agreed to go home with a guy like him, or that he's interested in her, the other way around, or that this guy is just like so like perfect. Yeah, but there's an aspect of like wish fulfillment in that for sure. For sure. Any guy would love to have a body like that and impress a girl, not so much in like a kind of like fawning way, but like she's still ribbing him even though she's impressed. So there's a fun dynamic there. I can get it. I can understand that.
Did you hit the gym right after, Rob?
Well, I would have, but of course the gym is closed because stupid pandemic.
Right. You can still do it at home in your little.
True. Yeah, I've been working on that, but. Yeah, there's obviously like there's a certain amount of like, you know, wish fulfillment, body envy kind of stuff.
Yes.
And then and it's not just like their story either. Like it's the movie is perhaps more accurately described as like an ensemble comedy. So you've got the thread between Gosling and Stone. You've got Steve Carell's character who's like an accountant type kind of mousy dork kind of guy who finds out that his wife wants a divorce. His wife's played by Julianne Moore.
Of course.
And, you know, he's kind of kicked to the curb. He takes it, you know, relatively in stride, but he's still like kind of stinging from it pretty hard. Meets up with Ryan Gosling's character at this fancy bar, spends a little bit too much time at the bar complaining about his marital situation, and kind of inspires Gosling to be his pickup artist, dating coach kind of guy. And so that kind of sets their stories off on a thing. And then there's a sort of a B or C plot where the son of Steve Carell's character is crushing on his babysitter, and there's a bit of intrigue there that kind of builds to a climax, and then everything is kind of brought to a conclusion. All of the characters kind of smashed together in the way that these ensemble movies tend to do.
Yeah.
But I felt that there's like two climaxes in this movie.
I agree. The pacing's weird.
The first climax is the one that you actually care about because there's a decent enough twist. Like if you're not paying super close attention, it might catch you off guard. And it's kind of like a rewarding, it's a fun kind of thing. the movie should have ended in the next scene after that, I think. But instead, it kind of like draws out this kind of, it's trying to make this argument about the, like the title suggests, that love is like crazy and stupid, and you hate being in love, but you also love being in love, and it culminates in this like second climax at a school graduation, and Steve Carell's son is trying to make this argument that love doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it's stupid, and Carell's character has to kind of stand up and very awkwardly and very cringily defend love in front of all of these parents and students and everything, and then of course like you get the happy ending or whatever. But it just, like, I understand the value of cringe comedy, but I feel like this one pushed it a little bit too far, and it just like, and it wasn't even the cringe, it felt contrived. It felt like a screenwriter had cooked this up and thought it was the smartest thing in the world, and didn't question it after that point. Like, nobody questioned whether this scene made any sense at all.
To be fair, Steve Carell is one of the few actors who can make cringe bearable.
Yes.
If you go back and watch some of the Office episodes, oh man, some of them are really, really cringe.
It makes you like just bury your face in a pillow or something. You just can't handle it. Yeah.
So I had the same criticism with Crazy Stupid Love, is that there were some scenes, there's a lot of chemistry that was really good, but at the end of it, I couldn't really like describe the plot to you in 2 sentences. There's just so much going on, so many peaks and valleys. And so when the final climax hits, you're kind of like, I'm not sure if this is going to be the end or not, but I'm going to go along with it. So it does feel strange in that sense, in that the pacing feels either whipsaws too much or just flatlines, because each climax doesn't touch that peak.
It just kind of, it feels written, if that makes sense. It feels like an essay that like a high schooler would have written, and obviously like that's kind of what happens in that second climax, but you almost want the movie to not kind of believe its own bullshit.
Speaking of movie with lots of bullshit, in a good way, Election.
Yeah.
So this is a Reese Witherspoon film that kind of like catapulted her to stardom, and we talked a little about typecasting, and because of this role she had been typecast for a lot of her future roles. But this is a story about a high school senior, I believe, who runs for class president, and Matthew Broderick is the teacher who is wise to Reese Witherspoon's no good antics,
and it's like he's a teacher who is committed to teaching. He's he starts out as a good guy. It's clear he cares about his job and making setting kids on the right path and everything. But there's something about the kind of like high achiever smarminess of Reese Witherspoon's character that just sets him off and makes it almost like it reminds him that he could have hit higher heights than he did. And instead, he's teaching history at a suburban high school.
There's a lot of subversive elements here at Carver, like Rick Thiessen or Kevin Speck and those burnouts. Or what about Tammy Metzler? I mean, her whole thing is being anti-this and anti-that.
Tracy, you're a very intelligent girl. You have a lot of admirable qualities. But one day maybe you'll learn that being smart and doing whatever you need to do to get ahead, and yes, stepping on other people to get there, well, there's a whole lot more to life than that.
This is Alexander Payne's one of his first films, I believe, before he like really hit it big with like Sideways, The Descendants. So you had obviously watched a lot of his previous work before you watched this. Could you tell right away it was like an Alexander Payne film, even if it's an early Alexander Payne film?
Yes, there's something about Payne, and there are other critics out there that have done a better job of kind of like voicing what it is that makes an Alexander Payne movie a Payne movie, but he kind of has his finger on like American suburban kind of ennui. It sounds super pretentious, but like
I feel like he has a good thumb on problems that only white suburban Americans will have.
Yeah, and that does feel like an overexplored aspect of movies. I get it, but it feels so on point. It feels so observant,
right?
And it's also kind of hard to see this movie now, like circling back to it almost more than 20 years after it came out, and not see it in combination with other movies that came out in 1999, like American Beauty.
Yes,
where you've got and even Fight Club and there was this whole bunch of movies in 90.
A lot of counterculture.
A lot of stories about white middle-aged dudes struggling with
midlife crisis.
Yeah, midlife crisis and fetishizing younger women and kind of raging against the place that they'd carved out for themselves in society. Again, that's a topic that has been better explored by other very smart people, but it happens here where like Broderick's character he can't quite voice what makes him hate with Reese Witherspoon's character so much and makes him want to undermine her student body president campaign.
Well, because in this film, he's kind of like the straight guy. He sees through her bullshit.
Yeah, he interprets it as bullshit, but like she doesn't see it as bullshit at all. She's not self-aware enough yet to really see it. And
really, that's interesting. I kind of disagree, but okay.
That's how I read it. Like I felt like it's funny actually that she ends up as a political staffer in Washington at the end of the movie. And she's kind of like, that to me kind of speaks to like, she's very able to sell herself on an ideal and not question it. And I think
exactly.
Maybe you could say that about anybody who has like political aspirations when they're in high school, but I think that's one of the many observations in that movie gets so right.
So it's a dark comedy, and student government to me has always been one of like the biggest faults in Western society. I think student governments are just horribly run. I think everyone who does it is kind of self-serving on some level, and that's what I get from Tracy Flick, which is Reese's character, and I think it's I don't think it's by coincidence that she becomes a political staffer. Because I think this is Payne's way of saying, look, like in high school, this is how we breed people to be this way. And Reese Witherspoon's character just happens to just nail it. She gets it. And not only that, she ends up destroying the careers and the lives of other people in doing so. In the years after this movie, Reese Witherspoon ended up doing Cruel Intentions. And Cruel Intentions, again, was like one of those films where there's something beneath the surface where young kids are very not so innocent, and they get where they are and they get what they want through nefarious means. And then afterwards, she kind of parodies herself in Legally Blonde, which I thought was really, really funny. But then she had crafted this, she had been typecast as this like really kind of bitchy but super smart blonde girl.
Yeah, and then she, there was lots of romantic comedies that she did, and now in the past few years, she's been working a lot in like streaming TV, and from what I've heard, I have people have told me. People are always telling you what shows that you're missing out on, but Big Little Lies is apparently like a tour de force from her.
Yeah, do you watch that?
And now no, but again, like it's one of those things where clearly, like, if you ever found yourself thinking that she had gotten herself stuck accidentally in like romantic comedy mode, she clearly is aware of that and is very, very able to break out of that whenever she wants.
Yeah, I think that's a conscious choice by her too, because she had been viewed as this like really bitchy mean girl, and I think there's a part of her that wanted to shed that. When the first time I watched this, I didn't really get it because dark comedy is kind of foreign to an 11, 12-year-old. So I understood the gist. I understood that Tracy Flick is not this like super innocent character, and I get that Matthew Broderick isn't a perfect character either, but somehow he was always on the wrong side of things despite being right. But what did you think? Like, what are your final thoughts about Election?
I think it is very interesting to do like maybe a double feature or even like a mini film festival kind of program where you have Election on the same bill as American Beauty and maybe this is going to sound a bit weird, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where you kind of see like, and I would put like Ferris Bueller's Day Off is like it's pure kind of American comedy from the 80s where Broderick is playing this guy who's like, he's the one who's skating over the top of everyone and cutting through like bureaucracy and just having the best day ever. And, there's some lessons are learned along the way, but ultimately he has a great day. And then progressing him to Election, where he's playing a guy who's like also in a high school setting, but has transformed completely and is completely unlike the character that we see him in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then American Beauty, which is an even darker, more cynical kind of take on American suburbia, and like Election came out in 1999 when there was all these movies about like white dudes just not figuring out how to be good or content or anything like that.
Yeah.
So you could there's kind of threads running between all of those things that I think make for a very fun and dark and cinematic experience.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of cinematic experiences, though, you rented The Hunt, which is like, is it your first time you've rented like a wide release film at home? I guess, yeah. I mean, something that would have been intended to be in theaters for a lot longer. And yes, this was kind of the first crop of several movies that, they had come out properly in big screens, and the studios behind them or the distributors decided that they were, movie theaters are closing up due to the COVID-19 thing, and they were offering them on streaming services for a $20 rental fee. And I had heard of The Hunt previously because it had been originally scheduled to come out last year. I can't remember which month, but it was, the trailer came out and everything, and a combination of things happened. The alt-right in America managed to get their hooks into it, and they started pushing this thing about this movie, which is supposed to kind of like send up the political situation in America by exaggerating things to an extreme. And they kind of started this PR campaign against this movie, saying that it was making fun of Republicans and so quote unquote deplorables. And it was an example of the Hollywood elite kind of running rampant with their criticisms of Republicans and people on that end of the political spectrum. But then even like President Trump ended up tweeting about it, and he didn't mention the movie by name, but it was enough. Like, it was clear that someone had told him about it, or he'd watched some story about it on Fox News, and he decided to slag the movie on his Twitter feed. At the same time, there was a mass shooting in Texas, I believe, and that was enough to kind of make the producer say, it's a better idea if we just kind of pulled this movie for a little while. They scheduled it to come out in, I guess it was like late February, early March of this year. It came out, but prior to that, they ran a new marketing campaign where they said, see the movie that everyone's talking about despite the fact that they've never seen it. Yeah. Kind of something along those lines.
Why would they do something like that?
Same reason elites do anything, because they think they're better than us.
Yeah, but why you? I mean, it seems so personal, right?
What, you think it's our fucking fault?
No, that's not what I'm... No, I would never blame the victim. Yeah. There'd have to be a reason is all.
Actually, on the theatrical movie poster, there's the original release date, and it's crossed out, and then they have the actual release date next to it, which is interesting.
Right. So then, amidst this kind of whole cloud of stuff, I even though, everyone was locked down for the pandemic, I figured I had to seek this thing out and kind of see what it was all about.
And
it's all right. It's a bit obvious.
It's a Damon Lindelof film, like written by Damon
or he
Lindelof.
like co-wrote or something. And they didn't change anything from the version that was going to come out in theaters originally. There was some people whispering that might happen.
Oh, okay.
But no, the movie's unchanged, and it depicts a world where a Twitter conspiracy theory spreads that a bunch of rich liberal elites are planning to hunt a group of quote unquote deplorables for sport at some sort of like manor estate. Mm-hmm. And the movie opens with a bunch of these like red state deplorable types who fit broadly into like some stereotypes. You've got like the angry racist podcaster guy, and the old fart coot who likes guns too much, and the rich country club girl who grew up in a Republican family, stuff like that. They're all waking up in this this kind of game reserve with like ball gags in their mouths, and they're, you know, given a bunch of weapons, and then suddenly their people are trying to shoot them to kill them. And slowly they tease out this plot about like, oh, it was started as like a Twitter thread, but then it was never real. But the people who were kind of slagged in that Twitter thread, the rich people, the rich Democratic types, they got so angry about being implicated in the fake conspiracy that they decided to do it for real. And now we're watching these deplorable characters kind of try to outrun these rich people who they're not really all that fired up about it for real, except they are. It's essentially what ends up happening is you have one of the deplorable characters played by Betty Gilpin, who a lot of people might recognize from Glow. She's one of the female wrestlers on Glow, and she turns out to have been mistaken for somebody else.
Classic Lindelof.
They wanted to put somebody into this human hunting thing who was just like I think like some sort of car rental employee or something. It turns out that Betty Gilpin's character has the exact same name, but she's an Afghanistan veteran and is very handy in a fight. And she just plows through all of these rich hunters who are trying to kill her, and makes her way to this manor that's been purchased by Hilary Swank, the character played by Hilary Swank.
How convenient.
And they get into a fight and, you know, beat each other bloody. And it's supposed to be this allegory for, Democrats versus Republicans in everyday life. And that's kind of that's kind of like where the movie ends. It's a little bit obvious. It doesn't really have the kind of subtlety that you would want given the setup. And what it really, really needs is more of the rich characters, these liberal characters, seeing the error of their ways. Instead, they're kind of just like dispatched in the goriest way possible by Betty Gilpin's character, when you kind of want them you want more scenes of them kind of like freaking out and seeing just how absurd the situation is that they've created. So you don't get that kind of like catharsis. Instead it's more like horror movie style executions.
Is it kind of like The Purge?
A little bit. But I feel like The Purge, one of the reasons that The Purge has spawned such a huge like franchise is that it had a little bit more depth to it, the world that it created. This feels very surface level.
Right.
And granted, like The Purge is still ridiculous, and obviously it exaggerates things quite a bit, but it still feels a bit more plausible than this. Like, you don't really buy the fact that these people would be so angry about being besmirched in a Twitter conspiracy that they would become the very thing that people said that they were.
Right.
It just doesn't feel plausible. So
do you think the poor reception of this film is based on the fact that people just don't like the politics?
Yeah. And that's like ultimately the movie is more interesting due to the conversation around it than the movie itself, which is ironic.
Which is a bad sign.
Yeah, you know, I mean, like the fact that everyone freaked out about it in the way that they did kind of confirmed the central idea of the movie, but it didn't make it a good movie.
Right.
If that makes sense. You know,
no, that makes
like the whole idea is that people were fighting over nothing and that they were fighting to a stalemate and neither side was 100% right. And that's all the movie has to say. And you're like, well, I didn't need the movie to confirm something I already knew.
Right. So
that these fights are pointless.
The other question I wanted to ask was like your experience of watching it at home. I never mind the fact that the film, you know, wasn't very good, but was there something different about the experience? Was there something positive or negative about it? Like, did you actually wish you saw this in a packed theater instead?
Maybe if I was in with the right audience, I think that might have helped a little bit. If I was in kind of like a film festival audience where people were really amped up and maybe enjoying themselves a bit and cheering and whooping and that kind of thing, that might have helped. But, you know, I mean, ultimately it felt like every other movie I've watched on Netflix. You know, I have a decently sized TV and I was streaming it on, in this case, I got the rental from YouTube because they happen to have it.
Did you like dim the lights, grab snacks, like kind of like simulate
I did have
like
popcorn.
A theater environment? Because I find that if you watch movies at home and you leave your light on, it actually just takes away from the experience. Like, I'm just not as focused for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I did have popcorn with me, so it's you know,
extra buttery.
I didn't do that intentionally. I was just in the mood for popcorn. And, you know, everyone. Yeah. with movie theaters being closed, you know, if you're like me, you get a bit of a craving after a certain week or so.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't take too many extra steps to kind of try to simulate anything. It's fine. And if we're kept out of the movie theaters for a couple more months, it might be something that I'll have to do again, pay the $20 and see something that was intended for theatrical release. Okay, so we've come to the end of all of the kind of lightning round of all these movies, but it's taken up way too much time. So we're going to split this mammoth episode into 2 parts. So come on back for part 2, where we're going to get into both Tiger King on Netflix and Dirty Money. So come on back as soon as you finish this one, or, it's a pandemic. You can do it whenever, and hear what we have to say about those 2 new shows.